On May 2nd, get ready to escape. Isis, Escape from Transylvania. The goddess next door and John Haynes must escape a horde of vampires on the hunt in this horror-filled Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Escape from Transylvania in paperback and e-readers this May 2nd. I was watching a Yellow Flash video and he was talking about how some of these SJW Comic Pros said that they would live in a dumpster in order to produce the comics that they're publishing right now, and how they were suffering for their art. And as I was watching that video, I got angry because I have been out of work for 9 years, and I go out here and I try to publish books on a shoestring with the SJS Direct imprint. And to see these SJW Comic Pros who are working at companies like Marvel Comics and DC Comics and Image Comics, where they, in some cases, are getting a paycheck from freelance work or payroll for working in editorial, talking about how they're suffering for their art, that really it made me angry because these people don't appreciate the opportunity they have been blessed with. And the reason why I can say they don't appreciate the opportunity they have been blessed with is because when you don't have a salaried position and you don't have much money, you appreciate every opportunity given to you to go out here and do what you want to do. Now, I have been given money in donations by many people to go out here to pay for book covers, and I thank God that those people go out of their way to give me money to pay for those book covers, because if it wasn't for them helping me to get the money to pay for these book covers, for ISIS series books like Samurai Goddess and East Team Ascension, and the recent ISIS Escape from Transylvania, those books would still be on the hard drive of my computer, because the only thing holding up many SJS Direct books is the fact that I just don't have the money to pay for the covers. And if it wasn't for my viewers donating money to pay for those covers, those books would not be on Amazon.com right now. And I believe that many of these SJW Comic Pros, if they had to go out here and spend their own money, they would appreciate the opportunity to go out here and work at a company at like Marvel Comics that publishes their work. Because what they don't understand is that it costs money to go out here and publish comic books, print comic books, distribute comic books, and then it costs comic shop owners money to sell those comic books. But many of these SJW Comic Pros, they don't appreciate the opportunity God has blessed them with, because they take their lives for granted. And for them to sit there and say they would sit in a dumpster, live in a dumpster to produce these comics, shows me how much they take their lives for granted. Again, when it comes down to them, I believe if they had to pay their own costs, they would not be saying these kind of things. Because back in 2009, when I started the SJS Direct imprint, I had just lost my job about 6 or 7 months ago, and I was starting with my own personal savings to start this SJS Direct imprint on Lightning Source. And I spent my own money on things, and it showed me how much it costs to get a book published and how much money you can lose publishing a book. Now, my first book was all about Marilyn, a screenplay I published back in 2009. And it cost me $179 for an ISBN, and it cost me $40 to upload the book to Lightning Source, and it also cost me $40 to upload the cover. Now, I saved a few dollars because I had gone out here and I bought Photoshop and I bought Adobe Acrobat on the laptop I had, and I designed my own covers and I designed my own page layouts. And the covers weren't that great in the beginning because I was designing the covers, but I managed to get the book to the marketplace. And after I got the book to the marketplace all over the world, Amazon.com and many other online booksellers, I then bought some copies for review. And I think I bought about 2 cases of these books, and because I still have some of those books in my closet right now. And those books, they cost, I believe they cost $2.21 a copy, because at Lightning Source they charge you about 0.2 cents a page plus 90 cents for the cover. And every page in the book you are paying for. And I did this for the Maryland book,
and I still have books to this day, and it was hard to sell them even at places like the Harlem Book Fair. And I believe, again, if these SJW Comic Pros had to lug all those books from convention to convention and try to sell their own books, they would have a different attitude about the comics that they publish, and they would make efforts to try to improve the quality of their publications, like I try to improve the quality of my publications from book to book. Now, All About Maryland did get critical praise from many of the book clubs I shipped free copies to, but again, that cost me money as well. Each book that I was shipping out, this was a book that cost me $2 to print, and it also cost money to ship to that person to read for review. And some people I shipped to never gave me a review, and others gave me praising reviews, and that's just part of it. And in 2011, I published another book, The Temptation of John Haynes, but I had learned my lessons from All About Maryland, and after buying 2 cases of All About Maryland, I only bought 1 case of The Temptation of John Haynes, and I shipped fewer copies of The Temptation of John Haynes to reviewers, and again, all those books cost money. Now, Temptation of John Haynes was a 400-page book, and this one, I think it cost me about $4 or $5 per copy. So I spent quite a bit of money on those books, and I still have a few of those. I have about 10 of those in my closet right now. Now, I had learned my lesson from Marilyn and John Haynes about buying lots of books, because I didn't want to have boxes and boxes of these things. And when it came time to publish All About Nikki, the companion novel about Marilyn, I bought far fewer copies. And with Nikki, what I did was I only bought 5 copies, and I only shipped maybe 2 to reviewers, and then I kept the rest for myself. I gave some to family members and kept maybe about 2 copies for myself. So I learned my lesson from those 2 other books not to spend as much money, because at the end of the day, I was winding up getting stuck with these books, and in many cases, I would wind up having to bring those books back from places like the Harlem Book Fair, where I went 2009 and 2010, spending my own money trying to get the word out about my own books, and only selling 1 copy of ISIS at each book fair. And that was a lesson I learned the hard way, about publishing, because after 2011, I started shifting my focus to ebooks, and because my money was running low, and then I took many of my books that were on Lightning Source over to CreateSpace due to the financial issues I had. I discontinued many of my books on Lightning Source, and I had to take them over to CreateSpace. And now, when I'm working on CreateSpace, most of the books I'm publishing now, I only buy one review copy, and that's the only one I have in my collection. The reason why I'm doing that, again, is because I know how much it costs to print these books, and I know that I'm going to have a hard time trying to sell these hard books in a marketplace. So I usually let the online booksellers do the selling, and I just do the promoting. And these days, what I primarily pay for now are book covers, and usually, in most cases, I take money from donations from people to pay for part of the book covers, and I take part of the money from my own eBay sales, from my toys in my personal collection, to pay for these book covers. And I thank God for every person who donates to my Patreon or PayPal or goes out of their way, because if it wasn't for those donations, many of the books that are in the SJS Direct catalog for 2016, 17, and 18 wouldn't be published. I can honestly say ISIS Samurai Goddess would have never gotten published if it wasn't for a sister going out here to give me a donation back in 2016. Because if it wasn't for her giving me that donation, I wouldn't have been able to get the money to pay the artist to design the cover for ISIS Samurai Goddess. And if it wasn't for a brother spending the money to donate to me, I wouldn't have had the money to pay for the cover for East-Steam Ascension. And if it wasn't for O'Shea Duke Jackson having me write 2 articles for him, I wouldn't have had the money to pay Mike Williams for designing the cover for the legendary Mad Matilda. And if it wasn't for donations on my Patreon, I wouldn't have had the money to pay Bill Walker to design the cover for ISIS Escape from Transylvania. the same artist who designed Samurai Goddess and East Team Ascension and many of the other ISIS series covers like Night of the Vampires and Wrath of the Cyber Goddess. So I wouldn't have that money to go out here to pay for those professional book covers which have made a major difference in how people perceive my products. Because when I would go out here and hand draw the covers, people would put my books on lousy book cover lists and wouldn't think about the writing or the quality of the writing, which when people read it say it's of the highest quality. But many of these SJW comic creators who say that they're suffering, they really, as I see it, don't know anything about struggle, because many of these people are sitting there in their office jobs and editorial, or they're enjoying the salary from their freelance jobs, and they come from a tremendous position of privilege, and they don't appreciate the opportunity they have been blessed with to work in the comic book industry. And I believe, again, if they had to live the way many POD writers and self-published writers like myself live, they would understand what suffering for their art is. Because most of the titles I publish on the SJS Direct imprint, they're published on a shoestring budget. And when it comes down to things like page layouts and page design, I do all that work. And I do all that work working many times all the way up until 2 or 3 in the morning, making sure that these books are of the top quality, making sure that there are next to no typos, and making sure that the grammar is correct, making sure the sentence structure is correct, making sure that the pages are laid out, that they're easy to read. All that work is work I do by myself. Now, I usually hire artists to design the covers these days because I want to present a positive image, but the interiors are all me. And I do all the editing, I do all the writing, I do all the page layouts. So when I listen to these SJW Comic Pros talk about how they're suffering for producing comics, they're not suffering at all. What happens is your customers are suffering through your entitled attitude, your smugness, and your hubris. And they're getting tired of having to deal with this, because you sit there and produce some of the poorest quality comics, and you talk about how you would suffer by living in a dumpster. When it comes down to things, many of the books you produce are of the poorest quality, and you think you're entitled to produce them because you're just an artist or a writer, but you know nothing about suffering for your art. You don't know anything about suffering for your art until you have been unemployed for long term like I have, and still continue to produce on a shoestring budget. Because when you are unemployed and producing on a shoestring budget, guess what you're going to do? You're going to try to make efforts to raise your bar and raise your standards, because you want to leave a powerful first impression on your customers. And as I see it, the SJW Comic Pro doesn't want to leave a powerful first impression on their customers. They don't want to build an audience. They want comics to be a club, and that's not what a person who has suffered it does. Because as a person who grew up on welfare, a person who grew up on food stamps, a person who grew up in Section 8 housing, I can tell you what suffering is. I can tell you what struggle is. And as a guy who has been through long-term unemployment and is still going through long-term unemployment, I can tell you what suffering and struggle is, because at one period in my life, from 2002 to 2008, I was living off of $60 a month a family member was giving to me. And in that time, I had to take that money and try to look for a job, send queries to publishers and literary agents, and still try to go out here and try to make a living for myself based on that $60 a month. And a couple of months in 2007, 2008, I had to literally live on $30 a month, because I took $30 to go out here and spend it on a civil service exam. So I know what struggle and suffering is, and I know how hard it is when you go out here and spend money on a book and then see that book barely sell 10 or 15 paperback copies and maybe sell 150 or 200 ebooks. So I know what struggle is. So when I listen to these comic pros talk about how they're suffering for their art, it really just annoys me, because I believe if these people had to go down the POD or the self-publishing route and had to start coming out of their own pocket for their own books, their attitude would change regarding the comic book industry, their attitude would change regarding the comics they crafted, and their whole demeanor would change regarding the way they treat people who are buying their comics and are a part of this industry. Because my view of things as a guy who has struggled and suffered is I appreciate every person who goes out of their way to read my books. I thank them for their support, and I appreciate every customer I get, because I wish I had the customers like many of these comic creators have at Marvel Comics. I wish I had the audience that many people had at DC Comics, because if I had that audience out there, I would appreciate every customer I had, and I would make every effort to give them the best quality publications like I'm doing right now on my SJS Direct imprint, because these customers are taking time to come out of their pockets to spend their money with you. And the disrespect that they get it's just appalling to me, because it shows that these people are not interested in earning money. They're just interested in using comics as their own personal social club and their own club where they can go out here and be these elites over people. And that's not what comics are all about. Comics were about giving people an escape, giving people a place where they can have fun for a while and get through and have some fun for a few moments on a day when they're either working on a job or they're at school. A place where they can feel safe for a little while and feel comfortable. And giving people that comfort is something I like to do when I write books like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, or even some of my novels like Spinsterella, Spellbound, Legendary Mad Matilda, and the Thetas. My job as a writer is to give people that escape, allow them to have a break from their everyday lives, and enter a new world where they can learn about different people and different cultures. And I thank God for the opportunity I have been given to go out here and publish on the Create Space platform, because if it wasn't for that platform, many of my works would be sitting in boxes waiting for some publisher to give me an opportunity to be published, or giving some agent an opportunity to be read. They'd just be sitting in boxes. And this is, again, something the SJW Comic Pro just doesn't appreciate, because they take their lives for granted. Because they take their lives for granted, they can't see the great opportunity given to them. And I believe the only way they would appreciate that opportunity is if it was gone. And I believe many people, when the comic book industry collapses, will finally appreciate the opportunity they had to be a part of the medium they destroyed. If you want to pick up some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the Temptation of John Haynes, the Spinsterella trilogy, and many of my men's issues books, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. And if you want to help me make more videos and publish more books, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. Comment, rate, and subscribe.